Hi everyone, thanks for watching this video. I'm Julia and this is my colleague Zio, and we are from USF Housing and Residential Education on the Tampa campus. And today we're going to be breaking down the 2023-24 housing agreement. So this is the agreement that residents do sign when they live on campus, on the Tampa campus, for the 23-24 terms is what we're going to be talking about today. And a lot of people have different questions about the agreement, so today we thought we would go through section by section and kind of break it down what each section means. And Zio is from our amazing assignments team, and so Zio is one of the people that answer a lot of the questions and emails that come in from residents and their family members. So we invited Zio down here today to the marketing studio to help break us down the agreement.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Zio. We are going to, like I said, go through the sections, but one thing we do want to make clear before we get into it is students and their families should definitely sit down and read this during their, before they sign it and before they enter the agreement. It's definitely important to go through and read this and figure out if you have any questions ahead of time. So this is just a resource for them, correct?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just start by reading the beginning section, and then as I have questions, we'll kind of break down what that means, okay? So the USF Student Housing Agreement. The USF Student Housing Agreement is a financially and legally binding agreement between the University of South Florida's Board of Trustees, a public body, corporate, and a prospective or enrolled student who is and intends to remain enrolled at the University of South Florida. This is an agreement for the use of space in the residence halls located in Tampa and all terms, including length of agreement, cancellation terms, and other terms as set forth herein. The village property, including Beacon, Endeavor, Horizon, Pinnacle, and Summit Halls, is owned by HSRE Capstone Tampa, LLC. For a seamless student experience, the university provides administrative services for the village, including but not limited to managing applications, assignments, and billing on the owner's behalf. Students choosing to reside in the village may be subject to additional requirements set forth below. So, Zio, my first question is, if someone is choosing to live in the village, what does that mean according to this section?
So that means that we do work with the LLC very closely to make sure that we're all on the same page. However, all of the billing, hall rates, any damages that you might occur as you're moving out, those are all set and based off of what the LLC decides. So there are also different maintenance teams for those buildings as well. But we do work very closely with them. And you can always reach us if you want to reach them or vice versa.
Got it. So even a maintenance request would be through the same portal, but it would just be filtered to a different team.
Yes, it would just go to different people, but you would do it the same way as anybody else on campus.
So for somebody that is considering living in the village, what would your piece of advice be according to this section? Should they go through and read any specific rates that are set forth for the village, and where can they get kind of the specific information for their property?
The specific hall rates are on the website along with the rest of the hall rates on campus, and they are accurate. In regards to any damage billing, you can always reach out to the housing@usf.edu email, or you can also give us a call. And if you do have any damages, we will be able to go through and let you know what exactly you would owe.
Okay, so the just rates are basically just a little bit different there. Yeah. Great. And so the last part of this section is any alterations by the student to the terms contained in the agreement will neither be honored nor deemed valid without specific written approval from the Assistant Vice President for Housing and Residential Education, recognizing acceptance of and identifying the proposed alterations. By signing the agreement, electronically or otherwise, the student is acknowledging notice of all the agreement terms. Any alterations by the student to the terms contained in the agreement will neither be honored nor deemed valid without specific written approval from the Assistant Vice President for Housing and Residential Education, recognizing acceptance of and identifying the proposed alterations. By signing the agreement, electronically or otherwise, the student is acknowledging notice of all the agreement terms. So this essentially means that someone signing this agreement is accepting all of the terms and conditions that are included in. I do notice that there is a mention of alterations. If something looks like you have a specific circumstance where you're having questions about a certain term or agreement that is within here, what would be the best course of action be for that? student?
The best course of action would definitely be to just contact us, whether that's sending us an email or giving us a call or even visiting the office. That would be the best course of action. If you have any questions or any doubts about what is in this agreement, we can always sit down and just talk about it a little further with you.
Perfect. And I think that it's super important just to keep in mind that to do that ahead of time, especially before you sign this, because things get a lot more complicated after the fact, but to ask your questions up front before getting into it.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so let's jump into the different sections in this agreement. The first section is the terms. So we're going to skip that section, and if anyone has any specific questions about it, they can reach out to the housing office. So let's talk about the application fee, and that's number 2. Upon submission of the application fee will be assessed to the student account. The application fee will be considered paid for the purposes of assignment when one of the conditions below has been exercised. A, the application fee payment is submitted using university payment processes, or B, the department processes and approves a deferral of the required application fee. The application fee will not be waived. Okay, so we're going to start off with the application fee questions, and I know that this is something that you do get a lot up in your office. So here it does say you either can submit the application fee or you through the typical payment process, or you can get a deferral of the application fee. So can you break that down a little bit and talk about what is the difference between a deferral and being waived, and then also how to submit your application fee?
Of course. Yeah, so the difference between the deferment and a waiver for the application fee is that with the deferment, you are just agreeing to pay the application fee at a different time. So the application fee will still be assessed to your OASIS account. It will just be due at a different time with the rest of your rent for that specific semester. With the waiver, that would mean that you don't pay the application fee at all. So what we do here at Housing is that we do a deferment. So if the student is eligible, the eligibility requirements can range from different types of scholarships that the student may have, their EFC or estimated family contribution. All of those things are taken into account when deciding if a student is eligible for the deferment, but they can submit that on the housing portal and our team will get back to them within a few days, letting them know if it's been approved, and then they would just pay it along with the rest of their rent and when the rest of their scholarships have been applied to their account.
Perfect. So the process would be to go in and submit, if you wanted a deferral, to go in and submit a request for a deferral, and then wait for if it's approved or not. And then once it's approved, will it say when it's actually due? When the payment should be processed?
We will let the student know that it will be due upon the deferment deadline, which we'll probably talk about a little later.
Okay.
So it will be due with the haul rates and all of that once it is posted to the account.
Great. And in what situations could the application fee potentially be waived?
So we never waive the application fee. The deferment is the only option for students who feel like they don't have the application fee at the time and can use maybe their scholarships or something like that at a later time.
Got it. Okay, so and how do you pay the application fee?
So when you pay the application fee, that is all done through OASIS. So a business day after you complete your application, you will see that $50 fee pop up on your OASIS account, and you will go in and just make sure that you pay by line item. If you have any questions about how to do that, you can contact us or even check our website because we have a step-by-step instruction process on how to get that done. Once you make your payment, you do have to allow 1 to 2 business days for that to update. It just takes a day or two for OASIS to communicate with our housing system that the payment has been made and processed successfully.
Great. And now I know that this is something that you've been getting a lot this year specifically. And that's the question regarding the $200 admission deposit to the university. So that's something that's separate. It's not related to housing, but if you decide to attend the University of South Florida, there is an admission deposit. A lot of people ask if that admission deposit can cover the housing application fee.
Yes. So the admissions deposit does not cover the housing application fee. That $200 is going to be directly applied to your tuition when your tuition is posted to your Oasis account. So even if you see that negative 150, that's just because Oasis is a calculator-based system. You still have to go in and pay by line item the $50 application fee in order for your application fee to be marked as complete.
Got it. That's super important because you are getting a lot of questions about that this year.
For sure.
Okay. So that is the application fee, and now on to the next section. Unless there's anything else about application fee that we didn't talk about.
I think that is all.
Great. So let's talk about the effective date. The agreement shall become effective upon the department receiving the housing application. The application fee, by one of the two methods specified in section 1.2 that we just talked about, and meet the terms listed in section 1.4. Once this agreement becomes effective, the student is eligible for an assignment. So this is really important because this means that once you have submitted the agreement and paid the application fee, you are eligible for an assignment. What does that mean?
Yes, so eligible for an assignment basically means that your spot in line for room selection has kind of been secured. So at the time that room selection begins, you will receive an email letting you know your specific date and time that you can go in and select your room, given that all of your other application requirements are also completed. Like if you're a first year student, you do have to complete orientation as well. But basically paying the application fee and having that application fee payment completed secures your place in line for room selection that'll come later.
And you say complete orientation, but it's just the registration that you need to complete, correct?
Yes, it is just the orientation registration that you have to complete in order to select your room. You do have to complete orientation and actually go
Eventually,
to
yes.
come to the school, but for housing, the only thing you have to do is register.
Okay, great. So let's talk about the eligibility requirement for housing. So the first part of this is students who have been accepted to the university by the University Office of Admissions are eligible to apply for housing. Student must submit both the application and the application fee, which is consideration for this agreement. So that's kind of straightforward, but to be considered for housing, you need to be accepted to the university, and you also need to submit the application and the application fee in order to be considered.
Yep, you just have to be an official student of the university in order to have access to the application.
Yeah, an official accepted student. Perfect. So the next section is students must remain enrolled in the university courses during each semester covered by the terms of this agreement. Should student fail to meet this enrollment requirement, the department, on behalf of the university, may cancel the agreement and require student to vacate their assigned space in accordance with applicable university policies or other applicable laws, regulations, policies, or procedures. So this means that you need to stay a student, correct?
Yep, you must be enrolled in courses in order to live on campus.
And they can be online, correct?
Yes, the courses can be online, hybrid, any format. They just must be registered.
And so a question that may come up is if you are a Tampa student and you're taking some summer terms online at St. Pete, can you still be living on campus if you're not taking Tampa location courses?
Yes, so even if you are taking classes at any of the University of South Florida campuses, whether they're online or in person, you are still able to live on the Tampa campus if you wish to do so. It doesn't mean you don't only have to be registered on the Tampa campus to live here.
Got it. But it has to be, like you said, USF classes. You can't be taking other university classes and still be considered a student here to stay on campus.
Yes. So you must be enrolled in classes at USF. You can be enrolled at HC at the same time if that's possible, but USF is the requirement.
Got it. Okay. And so we're going to talk about the assignment prerequisites. We already talked about the housing application and the application fee, but this next section talks about this orientation requirement. So undergraduate students must comply with university orientation requirements by registering for appropriate orientation program with the Office of Orientation. Continuing students have already satisfied the orientation requirement. The department will not refund the application fee if the agreement is canceled due to non-compliance with the orientation requirement. So we talked about this a little bit, but this essentially means that you need to register for orientation if you are a new student to the university, and in order to select your room and have all of your your requirements done for the housing
Yeah,
agreement.
so you must be registered for orientation. This also means that you must pay your $200 admissions deposit, because without that, you won't be able to register for orientation, and then you won't be able to select a room. So we just do that in order to make sure that students are sure that they are coming to the university before they select a room on the campus.
Got it. So to that point, though, if you change your mind, you still can, right? So in order to, and we'll talk about that, I think, a little bit in cancellations, but you theoretically could apply for housing, pay the $50 application fee, register for orientation, which would in turn mean that you've submitted your $200 admission deposit, and still decide not to come to USF. Is that correct?
Yes, and even when you complete your orientation registration, you can still decide not to select a room if you're still not sure about USF, and then you may be able to cancel with no penalty as long as you don't have a room.
Okay, great. We'll talk about that when we get to cancellations.
Yep.
A very exciting section. And so I asked this before, but just to reiterate, do I have to attend orientation in order to select a room, or do I just need to register?
In order to select a room, you must only register for orientation. You don't have to attend. It's only the registration that's needed.
Perfect. All right. So next we're going to talk about availability for housing. This is section 2. Number 1, the department may initiate a standby process if the availability of housing becomes limited. To be considered for a space, the student must register for the standby list via the housing portal. Registration for the standby list indicates that the student will accept the space assigned, regardless of room type preference. Students assigned from the standby list waive the 48 hours cancellation eligibility described in section 4.2a.2. Hopefully I said that correctly.
Yes, you did.
Okay, so the standby process. This is something that has come up recently in the past few semesters or this past few terms, and I know that there are a lot of questions that surround the standby process. So this section really does just break down that if you register for the standby list through the housing portal, you are accepting the fact that when you're next, you will be placed in the next available room.
Yes. So with the standby process, what's really important to note is that if we get to the point where we have to initiate the standby process, the student must sign themselves up for the standby list. So it is not a automatic thing where if you don't have a room, you're automatically on the wait list. We want to make sure that students are signing up for the standby list, because you must be okay with what you just said, being assigned to any room that becomes available that you're eligible for, whether no matter the price or the building, the student must be okay with any bed on campus as soon as it becomes available. Without really any notification, because the standby list registration, when you sign yourself up, that's when you're agreeing to that term.
Got it. So it's not something, like you said, automatic. You need to go in and actually sign up for it in the housing portal.
Yes.
Those that are waiting to select a room and were not able to secure a space in a term will probably get an email with more information about this, correct?
Yes. So if we ever do get to the standby process timing, if we're at limited capacity, we will send an email to all of the students who are not yet assigned, letting them know what the standby policies are, in addition to the cancellation policies if they don't wish to continue on and join the standby list.
Got it. Okay. The next part of this section is the department may cancel the agreement if a room is not available or appropriate for assignment to the student. So what does that mean, Zio?
So that means that specifically if you are on the standby list, if at some point we get to the end of the standby process and we still have students on the list without an assignment, we will go ahead and let the student know, cancel their application, and refund their application fee if we're not able to house them.
Got it. Okay. Now we are going to move to the next section, which is section 5, inability to perform. If the department is unable to assign a student a space due to A, the student's failure to meet the assignment prerequisites, the agreement will be considered canceled by the student without a refund of the application fee. Or B, the department's inability to identify available space, the agreement will be considered canceled and the department will credit the application fee to the student's account. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but just to get into the details of this, if housing is unable to provide a space to a student, the first part of this is if they are unable to meet the assignment's prerequisites. What will happen at that point?
So this basically means that, let's say you did your application, but you never paid your application fee, or you never registered for orientation, or didn't do your co-signature. So that means that your application is incomplete. At a certain point, we will take all of those incomplete applications and we will mark them as canceled if the student does not complete them. Of course, we will reach out to students and let them know, hey, you need to complete these steps. And if they, at a certain point, probably during like later in the summer, we will cancel all applications that are marked as deemed as incomplete. So for Section B, the department's inability to identify an available space. So like I said a little earlier, if you are on the standby list and we do not have any rooms available at the end of the standby process, we will reach out to the student, let them know, and then that $50 will be credited back to the OASIS account.
So next we're going to be talking about the length of agreement. This section states the agreement dates covered by these terms, conditions, and responsibilities are for the fall 23 and spring 24 terms. The dates for each semester are available on the USF Housing website. The agreement's start and end dates and the length of agreement may be adjusted with notice to the student to align with the university academic calendar. Occupancy during break periods is limited to specific locations and incurs an additional charge. So, this means that these dates of fall 23, spring 24 terms could potentially be adjusted to align with the academic calendar. And specifically something in here that stands out to me is the occupancy during break periods. So let's break this down a little bit. The first one is the summer application. How does that fall into this?
So the summer application is actually an individual agreement that students would have to apply for and go through room selection for all over again. The fall and spring application does not roll over into summer, and summer does not roll over into fall. However, if a student does have a fall 23, spring 24 agreement on file, and they live on campus and would like to continue to live on campus for summer A or summer C, they can continue to live on campus. They don't have to move out and move back in if they complete a break stay request. So that is something that will be available on the housing portal during the time, and it does have a nightly charge that is attached to it.
So break stay, that is specific to certain buildings, correct?
Yes. So break stay is specific to certain buildings when we're talking about fall to spring. So during the winter break, there are only certain buildings that are open. So if you do not live in one of those buildings, you would not be eligible for break stay unless you decide to change your room assignment. And it is possible. For spring into summer, though, we are able to accommodate students transitioning from one room to another, typically. So that is something that can be possible for summer break stay, but not winter.
And this is really just on an individual basis, too. If you have certain questions about this, we really encourage you to reach out to the team ahead of time. If you are going into the 23-24 agreement knowing that you will need a break stay for the winter break, that's something that is going to be really helpful to know ahead of time so that you can select a space that is an option in, and you don't have to get through the end of the term figuring out what your next move is.
Of course, yes. So for winter break stay, those buildings can change depending on the semester and the year. So we definitely encourage students, if they know they're going to have to stay for the winter break, to reach out to us as soon as possible, just so we can make sure that they are in the correct building, and that if they are not, that we can move them if something is available at that time.
Great. All right, let's go to the next section, 7, occupancy status. Occupancy occurs when a student is issued the keys to the space or is checked in via the student housing software. If either condition exists, then the space is considered occupied. Occupancy will remain in effect until the checkout procedure is followed to depart the space. Removing personal belongings and vacating the assigned space without completing the proper checkout process will be considered an improper checkout, and the student will be financially responsible for the terms of the agreement and all associated fees. So this means you need to check out the proper way. Once you are issued your keys and checked in, that space is your responsibility, and you need to follow the proper checkout procedure. So I guess what types of questions are usually associated with?
So the question that we get a lot is, how do I properly check out? So the steps that a student must take if they are looking to vacate their space and not incur any additional fees is they need to collect all of their belongings and remove them from the room. Once they've completed this, they will need to set up a meeting time with their resident assistant or their residence life coordinator in order to complete their room condition report, where they will just go through the room and make sure that there are no damages and everything is accounted for. Once that is completed, the student will go over to their designated housing services desk and return their key. Once they return their key, then they are officially checked out of their room and they can go about and go home or go to a different room, whatever their specific case may be.
And I know a question that I do see around this time of year when people are doing checkouts is, can someone else check out on behalf of the student?
So we do not allow anyone else except the student to check out for the student. In some cases, if there is a medical emergency or something along those lines, we just encourage that the student reaches out to us so we can figure out a different course of action if necessary.
Got it. Okay. So let's talk about the next section, 8, occupancy requirements and transferability. So only the student with whom the agreement is made may inhabit students' assigned space, and such space is not transferable. Spaces may not be sublet to another person's. Appropriate monetary charges, as determined by the department, will be assessed and/or disciplinary action will be taken against violators of this section. So, subletting, having other people stay in your room, not allowed, right?
Not allowed at all. Even if we do have a standby list and you find someone who wants to take over your room so that you can cancel, we still do not allow that. Once you assign yourself to the room is yours, and you may not leave your contract in order to have someone take over.
Got it. And so we're going to move to the next section, which is the guest and visitor access, section 9. Guest visitor access may be prohibited or restricted within room or building. Students are responsible for the actions and any damages incurred by their guests. A student is prohibited from inviting or hosting a person in their room, residence hall, or on campus when the student knows that the university police or other university official has barred that person from campus. Any student or person who knowingly violates this section may be subject to all applicable university civil and criminal penalties. So, what does this mean?
Yep. So this means that you are allowed to have guests on campus, but your guest is basically your responsibility. So all guests must be with the resident at all times. And if you have guests, just know that you are responsible for any actions or any damages that your guests might do.
Okay. And so the end of this section really means that if a resident they should not knowingly invite a person over that is restricted from campus for some reason or another.
Yes. So if the person that you are inviting on campus is not allowed to be on campus for whatever reason, that will be your responsibility as well, if you are the person inviting them here.
Okay, so let's talk about guests and visitors a little bit more in terms of length of stay and the restrictions that are around that. So you said that you can have guests and visitors as a resident. How long can a guest stay?
Yes. So no guest can stay for more than 3 nights in a 30-day period. So as long as your guests are staying, the weekend or something like that, you can have guests, but just make sure that it is not an elongated stay. In addition to that, you do want to discuss the specifics of your guest policy with your roommates specifically. Once you move in, you will complete a roommate agreement with your roommates where you can talk about the visitation policies that you want and all of the rules that you specifically would like to set based on guests.
Okay. And for overnight guests, are they allowed, and is there any restriction on gender when it comes to that?
So there is no restriction on gender when it comes to overnight guests, and overnight guests are allowed. Again, that is something that you would like to pass by.
Right,
your
you want to
roommates.
talk about it with your roommate.
Talk about it with your roommates. Just make sure that everyone is agreeing upon the guest so that you can, keep everything in line.
And I think that that's a good point to just bring up that each resident will have an assigned resident assistant and residence life coordinator, like you mentioned. So you're going to sign a roommate agreement where you kind of lay out these things ahead of time so that everyone's kind of on the same page in terms of like comfort zone and that sort of thing. And your residence life coordinator and your RA are really there as a resource to work through these types of questions and these types of issues if they do arise in the hall. So it's a great resource to use. All right, so let's move on to entry rights. Number 10. Authorized department personnel may enter student spaces without the student's permission, but following prior notice to the student for maintenance, housekeeping purposes, and for fire safety inspections. When authorized department personnel have reasonable belief that a violation of university policy or violation of any local, state, or federal law, regulation, or ordinance is in progress, or in the event of an emergency, such personnel may enter student space without notice to students. Students living in the village also grant similar rights prescribed to the university above to personnel authorized by the owner, including without limitation personnel of owner's property manager. So essentially, university officials, USF housing officials, they will be entering spaces when it comes to maintenance, maybe emergencies, fire safety inspections. Students should expect a notice when it comes to these sorts of things, but in case of a little bit more of an emergency situation, that may not happen, correct?
Yes, of course. So one of the main reasons that university personnel may be entering your room is for maintenance. So if you live in a suite style room, those bathrooms that are in your unit are cleaned weekly. So the maintenance staff will come by every week in order to, clean your restroom. And they will knock and let you know beforehand. If you happen to not be home when the maintenance personnel comes by, just make sure that you do have your key on you, because they are required to lock the door as they're leaving, even if it was unlocked beforehand. So that is definitely something that you want to make sure you have at all times, is your key, because if maintenance comes by and locks the door, you will unfortunately have to go through the whole lockout key process. So just make sure you have your key out.
Good point. You must have dealt with that before, because it seems like you know that from experience.
My experience,
yeah.
actually.
Same. We've all made that mistake, so we are here to tell you to learn from our mistakes. Okay, sounds good. And it has a note in here about also granting the village similar rights when you live in that community. So we're going to talk about the condition of space next. That's section 11. The student acknowledges their responsibility to keep space and room in a clean and orderly condition and to adhere to sanitation standards in shared spaces. University staff retain the right to conduct health and safety inspections of the room. Charges may be assessed to students for damage to, unauthorized use of, or alterations to buildings, rooms, furnishings, appliances, equipments, or locks, and for special cleaning necessitated by improper care of buildings, rooms, furnishings, appliances, or equipment, either within the student's room or on the floor or in the building wherein student space is located. In the event additional expenses are incurred associated with the foregoing, the student will be assessed such expenses. So, all that to say, keep your room clean, because if there's a situation where someone needs to come in and step in for a cleaning necessity or safety or another fine or something like that, that may incur some fees to the student. Is that correct?
Yes. So in addition to that, you do want to make sure that everything in your room is allowed to be on campus. There are some things that you cannot have. So the resident assistants and the residence life coordinators do conduct health and safety inspections to rooms periodically throughout the semester while students are on campus. So it is important to look through our policies of what to bring and what is not to be brung on campus, to make sure that when you do those health and safety inspections that you are not incurring any additional fees or having to remove items from your room that you didn't expect would need to be removed.
And so you mentioned the policies for what to bring and what not to bring, because I know we get a lot of those questions. That's not included in this agreement, correct? It's a policies, or is it within here?
Yes, so it is not included in the agreement specifically, but it is found on our website under the resources tab. There's a policy tab that students can go to in order to see what is allowed and what is not allowed in their rooms.
Got it. Okay, and so we talk about, keeping things clean and a fee being charged potentially for someone needing to come in and step in if there's like a cleaning situation that needs to be addressed. But bathrooms, you did mention earlier. I think that the suites cleaned weekly by staff, and the ones that are shared from traditional spaces are cleaned daily.
Yes.
That is not a charge that's put on the student, is it?
No. So students who have the community bathrooms or the bathrooms in the unit, whether it's an apartment or a suite, they are not charged for the maintenance that is done to the bathrooms. That is something that's just included with their stay. Again, in the traditional style, they do it daily. They clean the bathrooms daily. Suite style, it is weekly. And I believe for the apartment styles, they come in, I think, like once a semester. But other than that, for the apartment styles, the student is required to, keep up with their bathroom and make sure everything is orderly.
Great. And next, we're going to talk about room assignment. So the department does not guarantee an assignment to a specific complex building, room, roommate, room type, or room occupancy, single, double, or triple. The department reserves the right to consolidate, change the occupancy designation, or change the assignment either in advance of check-in or after the start of the term. If one of the occupants of a double occupancy room moves out, the department will assign another occupant to that room. If no such assignment can be made upon notification by the department, the remaining occupant will exercise one of the following options. A, locate another roommate who agrees to be reassigned to the occupant's room, or B, be reassigned to a double occupancy room chosen by the department, or C, be reassigned to single occupancy if available and pay the single occupancy rate. In the event there is maximum utilization of facilities and no assignment can be made, the department will notify the student, at which time any fees paid by the student will be credited to the student's account. Let's jump into this section of the what happens if you are assigned to a room, a double occupancy room, right? So let's say you're in a traditional space and you have 2 beds in your room, but you're the only one there. Or if you either are assigned and no one's assigned to the other side, or if you had a roommate and then they're gone the next term, what are the different things that can happen in that situation?
Yeah, so when it comes to double occupancy rooms, even if you don't have a roommate at the time, you should always expect that a roommate will come in.
Yeah.
So even if it's the middle of the term, someone may room change or room swap into that space. So even if you don't have a roommate, we do recommend that you keep all of your belongings on your side of the room, just to not incur any additional improper checkout fees. If your RA or your RLC notice that you are taking up both sides of the space, there may be an issue with that.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, just because you don't have a roommate at the start of the term or you don't have a roommate for one term, doesn't mean that that will remain true for the rest of the term or the upcoming term. So especially if you're in a double occupancy room, just make sure that you are always ready for a roommate to come in and live with you as well.
Got it. Okay. So I think that that's what's covered in this section. Just to always be prepared. You're paying that double occupancy rate.
Yes.
So you do have the other space of this the other space of the room is available to someone else to be able to be selected potentially. So to always be prepared for that option.
Like it says here, if you are in a double occupancy room and you do want the roommate experience, you can always reach out to our office and we can always room change you. But at some point sometimes we don't move the student to a double occupancy space just because in recent years we are very limited in capacity. So you may stay in your room by yourself, but just know that a roommate could always come in. And if you want the option to move, you do have the option to do so.
Yeah, I think that the biggest time we see this too, to keep in mind, is if you're leaving for the fall term for that break that happens for winter break, and you're coming back for the spring and you're leaving your things in your room. If you had an empty side of your room for the whole fall, over the spring, it's very likely that someone will be placed in that space. So just to keep that side of the space clear and ready to go for somebody to be assigned to it.
Of course.
So the next part of the section, the university reserves the right to contract for comparable student housing accommodations in the event of excessive occupancy, available facilities, natural disaster, etc. The student agrees that all terms and conditions of this agreement are applicable in the event that additional student housing accommodation must be secured. What does that mean?
So this means that student housing accommodations may be needed that are not on campus. So at that point, we would reach out to students and let them know whether it's because of a natural disaster, damage to the building. That's something that is very much on a case by case basis. So if it is a situation that arises, we will contact those students individually and go over the next steps with them that way.
Right. And that's a rare occurrence, obviously.
It is a very rare occurrence. It could be that we might have to move you temporarily from one residence hall to another, but it isn't really likely that we'll put you off campus or anything like that. We typically like to keep the students on campus just so that the agreement remains, binding.
Correct. So the next part of this is students who have not properly occupied the room by 12 p.m. on the first day of classes and have not notified the department of their late arrival may be reassigned based on the needs of the department. So this is important to keep in mind.
Yes. So if you know that you are going to arrive later than noon on the first day of classes, we highly recommend that you reach out to our office or reach out to your residence life coordinator to let them know of your late arrival. It is very likely that if we have a need for your specific space and you're not in the room as of yet, we could change your space. So it's very important that students notify us if they are going to be arriving late so that we can make sure to keep their space available to them.
Great. All right, moving to the next section, which is room change and reassignment. All right. The student may, after written approval from the department, move to another residence hall space in accordance with the department's reassignment policies, which are incorporated herein by reference. Those students living in the village may also need additional approval to be eligible transfer to a room outside of the village. A student shall not be permitted to transfer to another space without the approval of the department. If the student does occupy another space without the approval of the department, they will be responsible for the hall rates of both the space they move to and the space they are assigned. So, super important information right there. What this means is basically the question that would arise from this is how and when can you room change?
Yep. So room changes and room swaps are available on the housing portal under the request tab. They usually become available after the first 2 weeks of school. So after the first 2 weeks, we know who's here and who is not, and we can start moving students who wish to move. So they can access that after the first 2 weeks on the housing portal. I feel like something that also comes up a lot when room changes come about is the difference between room changing and room swapping.
Right.
So when you are changing rooms, you are changing from the room that you are in to another vacant space on campus. So if you currently live in a traditional room and you're like, I think suite style would be better for me, you can make a room change request to change from a traditional style to a suite style, if the suite style is available. When you are doing room swaps, that means that you and another student who lives on campus are agreeing to swap spaces. So when you're doing a room swap, you need to submit the room swap as well as the student that you would like to swap with, and they would take over your bed space and you would take over theirs. So that's kind of the difference. With a room change, you're just moving to a vacant space on campus, and with a room swap, you are changing spaces with another student on campus.
And it's super important to do this by the book because what it says here is that if you don't have approval and written approval, that you could potentially be responsible for paying not only the rate of the room that you were assigned, but also the new space that you have then taken over.
So this is something that happens sometimes with room swaps. So it is very easy to just, give your friend the key and then you take their key and you just swap rooms. But when you go to return your key, every key has a number on it. And if the number that we gave you is not the number that you are returning to us, we had no record of your swap. So you are now responsible for the key that you gave us and the key that we gave you.
Right.
So that's kind of how that works with the charges if you do it kind of off the books.
Right. Okay. And so something that also comes up a lot when talking about room change and reassignment, and we talked about this a little bit when it came to visitor policy, but what do you do if you're having trouble with your roommates?
Yeah, so if you're having trouble with your roommates, the first thing you want to do, your first point of contact, if you have tried, personal conversations and all of that, your first point of contact would be your resident assistant or your RA. You would let them know of your issues. Your RA could do a mediation with your roommates to try and see if, with a objective outside person, if they can just help you out with coming to an agreement.
Right.
If they feel like they need to escalate that, they will refer you over to the residence life coordinator. Your residence life coordinator can advocate for you a little bit more if the roommate issues are kind of not able to be solved. The residence life coordinator can let our department know, hey, the student really needs to change rooms, and then we can work with you about, moving or anything like that. But your first point of contact if you're having issues with your roommates is definitely your RA, and it can get escalated from there.
Okay, got it. That's good to know. So now we're going to move on to the next section, which is 14, use of spaces. The department reserves the right to determine the need for and the use of all rooms, lounges, and other common or public areas in and around the residence halls. At the discretion of the department may limit or restrict the use of the common areas and multipurpose spaces. Residential hall lounges may be converted and assigned as a residential hall space when deemed necessary by the department. So this gives rights to housing to be able to use the rooms, lounges, and different spaces where they see fit if needed.
Yes, so the department can use any of the general common spaces for events or things like that, but students would definitely receive notice of if any event is happening or any part of the residence hall common area is not available, they would receive a notice of some sort just to let them know.
Okay, got it. So next section is 15, meal plan requirement. I know we get a lot of questions about this. All first-time and college students residing in the USF residence halls located in Tampa are required to purchase a meal plan. More information on meal plan options can be found at USF Dining. So I think that the biggest thing just to say for this section is that USF Housing and Residential Education and USF Dining Services are two separate departments. So any specific questions related to dining should be sent to dining specifically in their team.
So you do pick your meal plan during your housing application. So I feel like that's where a lot of that confusion comes from. So you pick your meal plan on the housing application. If you have any questions about your meal plan from that point forward, you would just contact the USF Dining office.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to jump into health and safety, which it has multiple different layers to it, this section. So I'm going to go section by section and see if there's anything else that we can add. Some of this is pretty straightforward, but just for people who have specific questions about it, we'll try to break this down for you as much as possible. So section 16, health and safety. The first section of this is A. The student acknowledges the inherent risk associated with living in a community environment and the student's shared obligation to prioritize health and safety for the benefit of the entire community. Basically, living with other people, especially in either a traditional or community space, it does have risks that are associated with it, and that you're going to try your best to prioritize a healthy and safe environment for the community.
Yep, that goes back into, just keeping your room and your space orderly, just to make sure that, we're keeping up with the health and safety as much as possible.
The next section's B. The student acknowledges they have considered their own personal health status and risk factors inherent with community living. C. The student agrees to adhere to university expectations intended to minimize risk of exposure of transmissible diseases consistent with health and safety guidance as determined by the university. For example, practicing physical distancing and wearing appropriate face coverings. So this section was definitely specific to when we had a peak in COVID-19 cases. There were cases on campus and off campus. So we learned a lot about the transmission of diseases through that time. So at this point, there is no mask covering mandate on campus. Is that correct?
No, yes, there is no mandated mask policy on campus, but if students wish to wear face coverings, they can do so.
They can do so, and also to be aware of your own personal risk in your own, if you potentially you're not feeling well, it may be a good idea for others around you. But just wanted to give the clarification there that it's not a requirement at this time. And next is the student acknowledges they may be required to submit to symptom checking or testing to access and remain in the residential community. There has been a time when we were doing this, like I said, dependent upon cases with COVID-19. And so it's just important to keep in mind that things change, as we've learned for the past 3 years. Things can change very rapidly. So it's important to keep that in here just so that everyone is aware that something like that could happen. Of course, hopefully not, but it could happen in the future. The student agrees to disclose to the appropriate university medical official immediately upon notification of transmissible disease test status, like COVID-19, meningitis, tuberculosis, etc., or contact about high risk exposure and instruction to isolate. This is very important. What does that mean?
Yes. So if you do have a test status that indicates you have any type of transmissible disease, you definitely want to get in contact with Student Health Services. At this point, we do not have any isolation rooms on campus, but if students do reach out to Student Health Services, they may help them with getting accommodations if they wish to isolate.
Correct. Okay. And the student agrees to comply with university direction requiring isolation. Isolation may require removal from assigned space, room, building, or campus. Isolation does not constitute cancellation of agreement. This is also important. If you are told by Student Health Services that you need to isolate based on your health status, and you are removed from a space or room or building, or even the campus status at this point, if you don't have isolation spaces on campus, that does not mean that the agreement is canceled, correct?
Yeah, so the student would still be under their agreement, even if they have to isolate for a specific period of time.
Okay. And then the last section of the health and safety section is students are required to comply with all health and safety laws, orders, ordinances, policies, regulations, and guidance adopted by the university or department as it relates to transmissible diseases. This guidance may evolve as circumstances warrant. University may require the student to leave university housing in the event the student's continued presence poses a health or safety risk to the housing community. Like I said earlier, things can change, things can escalate. Things have changed drastically since 2020 when some of these things came into place. But of course, it is important to keep in mind that they were put in place for a reason, and we learned a lot from that time. So just make sure that you're aware of the health and safety section when you're signing the agreement.
And it's important to note that things can change. So right now, we don't have a mask requirement, but that could change in the future if things change with, the pandemic or any other transmissible diseases.
Number of cases in the Tampa area. I know that a lot goes into the decision making with the environmental health and safety team that has a lot to do with these decisions that are made on campus. So at this point, some of these things aren't in place, but like you just said, things always change. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about accessibility. A lot of questions that come into this section as well. This is number 17. Accessibility. A variety of facilities is available for students with accessibility needs and other medical considerations. Students requesting reasonable accommodations for housing based on an accessibility need or a medical condition must submit their request for said accommodations in writing to the department by July 1st for the fall semester, November 1st for the spring semester, and April 1st for the summer semesters. Department staff may confer with the Office of Student Accessibility Services and/or Student Health Services to determine any reasonable and appropriate accommodations. Any information provided to the department substantiating an accessibility need or medical condition will be maintained in strict confidence pursuant to federal and Florida laws. So, Zio, I know that your team works closely with, like it says here, Student Health Services and the Office of Student Accessibility Services to accommodate as many students as possible with their needs. So can you break down this section a little bit for me?
Yeah, so if a student needs any type of medical accommodation for whatever reason, that is something that is included in the housing application. There's a little check mark. You just check that you need a medical accommodation, and we will send you an email with the instructions on how to do so. The medical accommodation request is found on the housing portal as well under the request tab. Basically, you will go in and kind of briefly state what you need for your medical housing, and then our team will follow up for documentation, whether that's a doctor's letter or any type of form that we require. We will follow up and let you know the next steps, and then depending on your need, we will go ahead and assign you to the appropriate space.
And I did mention some dates in there. Just definitely reference those when you're looking at deadlines for consideration for reasonable accommodations. The ones that I just mentioned there are going to be 3 different requests, correct? For fall, spring, and summer.
So when you apply for the fall spring application, your medical accommodation is valid for the entirety of the term of the agreement.
Got it.
So if you have a medical accommodation for fall spring, you keep it for the entirety of that term. If you have a spring only application, then you would need it for the fall. So the medical accommodations do not carry over into other terms. Just make sure that if you still need the medical accommodation, that you're submitting that with every application that you submit.
Great. So every application requires a new
Yes.
request for that. Okay. And some frequently asked questions we have for this section. One is, are assisted living devices permitted on campus?
Yes. So assisted living devices are things like a wheelchair, crutches, things like that are permitted on campus. You don't need any type of approval to bring your wheelchair or bring crutches or a cane or anything of that sort. If you do have an electric wheelchair, because of the wattage of those, we do require students to complete a medical accommodation just so that we are aware that you are bringing that device, so we can make sure that your room is able to charge it and things like that. So yes, assisted living devices are permitted on campus, but if you have a question about your specific assisted living device, you can always reach out to us and we can let you know if there's any requirements that you need to do before bringing it on campus.
And your ADA request, if you need extra space or an ADA room, that will cover that within the request process.
Yes, so in your request process, we will double check with you what exactly it is that you need if you don't let us know in the request, so that we can make sure that your needs are being met.
And do you have to submit an ADA request to bring medication onto campus?
No. So if you have any medication that you take regularly, you do not have to submit a medical accommodation for those. You can just bring them along with you. But if you have any questions, again, you can always reach out to us and let us know. But the medical accommodation ADA request is more for space. So if you need a change in your space or a specific type of space because of your medical condition, that is what the medical accommodations are for.
And if you have an assistance animal or an emotional support animal, does that fall under a request in this section?
Yes. So if you have a service animal or an emotional support animal, that would fall under the ADA/medical accommodation request, and you would need to let us know so we can follow up with the appropriate documentation for you to complete.
Got it. And are there any other frequently asked questions or points for under this section?
I do not believe so, but at this time, if students have any additional questions, our office is always open.
Sounds good. Okay, so we're going to go to number 18, utilities. The department is not liable for interruption or failure of utilities such as heating, air conditioning, water, electricity, internet, etc. The department reserves the right to assess additional charges and/or haul rate during the agreement period to offset increased utility and/or other operational costs, provided the department gives written notification to the student at least 30 days prior to any increase in haul rates or charges. So, this means that potentially, first of all, that the department isn't liable for if there is a AC, heating, electricity, internet outage. And second, that if, since utilities are included in your rates, if there is a spike in the cost of utilities, that it could potentially be added on to rates at the end of the term within 30 days notice. Is that correct?
Yes. So if any of your utilities, for whatever reason, fail, it is important to let our team know so that we can go ahead and fix those issues as soon as they arise.
Yes, and so that's done through a maintenance request on the website, and that's whether you live in the village or anywhere else on campus. If you go to the housing website, you'll actually see as a button right there on the front page that you can submit a maintenance request. And it's really important that even if you think someone else may have already submitted it, make sure that you do, just in case, because it might be something specific to your room.
Exactly.
Or something like that. And then our team can assess it based on, if it's an emergency, they'll get to it quicker. So it's definitely important to make the team
Yes.
know those things.
In addition to that, if it is something that is an emergency, like electricity or something like that, we do have an emergency line that
Mhm.
students can call. If it is after hours and something that is deemed an emergency happens, you can call that number and our team can get to it as soon as they can.
Sounds good. Okay, so let's talk about the next section, 19, damage liability. The university is not liable for damage to or loss of personal property, failure or interruption of utilities, or for injury or inconvenience to persons, except to the extent set forth in Florida Statute Section 768.28. Students are encouraged to provide their own personal property loss insurance. Okay, so what are some questions that come with this section?
Yeah, so some things that students ask are if renter's insurance is required. So, in order to live on campus, you do not have to have renter's insurance. But if it's something that you wish to have, just in case any emergencies or anything happens, it is something that students have the option to do. We on campus, the department does not offer any renter's insurance for students, so that's something that students would need to kind of figure out on their own. Sometimes a lot of students will just get like a subsidiary plan under their parents' mortgage or something like that, but it's something that is done individually by the student and it's not required by the university.
All right. And let's talk about number 20, department reservation. The department reserves the right to make additional and or modify existing rules and regulations. The department agrees to make every reasonable effort to inform student of any regulation changes or pertinent policy information. That one's pretty straightforward, just stating that rules and conditions could change and that students will be made aware if anything does change.
Yep.
Number 21, departmental discretion. The department may cancel the agreement or change student space assignment in the interest of order, discipline, health, safety, security, maximum utilization of department facilities and resources, and or educational delivery, or for students' failure to pay hall rate or charges in a timely manner. So, what does this section mean?
Yeah, so this section basically means that if you are not in compliance with the policies or the housing agreement, the department may have the ability to cancel your assignment. One of these reasonings would be if you're not registered for classes, we would need for you to, move off campus and no longer live on campus. This is also important when we're talking about submission of requests. So if you do a medical accommodation request or if you do a cancellation request, it's important to know that just the submission of your request does not mean that that specific accommodation that you're looking for is going to be met. Our team will always follow up with documentation and let you know what the next steps will be, but just the submission of a request does not guarantee approval.
Got it. That is important. Okay. The next section, 22, adherence to USF restrictions and compliance with USF regulations. Student agrees to comply with and uphold all university policies, procedures, regulations, as well as all local, state, and federal laws. That one's pretty straightforward. Follow the rules, right?
Follow the rules.
Okay. 23, provisional removal for behavior. Students who have been determined to create an immediate danger, threat, or disruption to the residential community may be provisionally removed from the residence hall until an investigation and a resolution can occur. Students will remain financially responsible for the agreement during the provisional removal. So this is stating that if there is a potential threat or danger that's posed to other residents because of a student's behavior, that they could be removed either temporarily or removed from their agreement, correct?
Yes, so the Office of Student Conduct would definitely communicate more with the student if they are meeting this portion of the agreement to let them know what the next steps would be.
Okay. And then number 24, this is the last part of this section. Then we move to rates and payment options. Correspondence. Correspondence from the department will be emailed to the student at their official university email account. This is something that Dave Kloiber and I talk about all the time when we're having live videos. You need to be checking your USF email account because that is where all of the communication goes to.
Yes, I always like to tell students as soon as you are accepted to the university, you are now a student of the university. So that at usf.edu email is where you want to check for any updates, not just from housing, but from other university departments and the university as a whole.
Great. All right, so we are moving on to the next larger section, which is rates and payment options. The first section underneath this is residence hall rates. Rates are listed on the department's website and are subject to change following approval by the University Board of Trustees. Students receiving financial aid will have any outstanding housing charges deducted from their aid prior to receiving a reimbursement check, regardless of their payment option. The agreement is separate from and not contingent upon financial aid or scholarship award notification. So, this is really just covering all of the different things that are associated with the hall rates. So, are the rates per person, or is it divided by how many people live in the unit?
So the rate that you see on the hall rates page of the website is the rate that the student will be given to their Oasis account upon the selection of the room. So the rate that you see is the rate that you will receive.
And how does a student pay their rent?
So when paying for your rate, like it says here, your financial aid will first be applied to your tuition. If you have any financial aid left over, it will then be applied to your housing rates. If you have anything left over after that, you will go on Oasis and pay through there, the same way that you would, similarly to how you would pay your application fee.
Okay. And hall rates, they're billed per semester, correct? So
Yes.
that is going to be through Oasis, and anything that is involved in financial aid or scholarship, that's a separate office, correct?
Yes. So this is part of the agreement just because financial aid is not applicable to changes in your financial aid, does not necessarily equate to needing changes in your housing. So that is why that part of the contract is in there. In addition to that, the hall rates page does have a monthly rate for each residence style, but that does not apply because we do bill students semesterly. So it's kind of just there as a resource for students
Okay.
if they do need any type of payment plan or anything. Sometimes financial aid, the Office of Financial Aid can help with those things. But as of housing, we bill it semesterly.
Got it. Okay. I think that is a helpful resource to have it broken down that way so you can kind of just like visualize what it would look like on a month-to-month
Yes.
basis. So the next section is Living Learning Community Program charges. So this section states student acknowledges that Living Learning Community Program charges are non-refundable and assessed in full by semester to the Oasis account of all students in a Living Learning Community space for any portion of the semester. These charges are published on the department's website for reference. So really quick, before we get into this section, being in a Living Learning Community is a Living Learning Community is a community of students that are living together based on interest or majors. So this is something that you apply for to be in a Living Learning Community. And when you do apply, you can see the different charges that are associated with that, correct?
Yes, and they are also listed on the website, all of the requirements and the charges that are attached to Living Learning Communities. Some have additional charges and some don't. So it just depends on which one you're interested in.
So to apply for a Living Learning Community, you do need to submit a separate application for that Living Learning Community. Is there a fee associated with the Living Learning Community application?
No. So the Living Learning Community application does not have any additional cost. The student just has to have their active general housing application on file.
Do they need to have paid the housing application fee yet to submit a Living Learning Community
No.
application?
So the only thing they do have to have is just the application on file. You don't have to have paid your application fee or done orientation if you're a first year student. But those two things are still needed if you later want to be assigned within the LLC if you are approved.
Got it. So we have a lot of information that we can share about Living Learning Communities. It's a great resource for students if you're looking to live with people with similar interests or majors as you. So we'll drop the link for learning more about Living Learning Communities in the description of this video. It's also on our website. If you go to USF Housing's website, we have a banner at the bottom and also some other resources that you can click around and find Living Learning Communities. So next we're going to talk about students' payment obligation. This section states the student acknowledges that spaces have different hall rates. The hall rate a student will be obligated to pay will depend on the space assigned to student. The student acknowledges that they will be bound by the agreement and any change in rates, fees, or other financial obligation. So we've talked about this a little bit, but the student is responsible for paying their rent and any fees associated with their agreement. Speaking of rent, I know a question that we get a lot, Zio, is when is rent due?
Yeah, so the hall rate is again billed semesterly, and it is due on the tuition deferment deadline for that specific semester. So this specific date can change with the semester. The date can be found on the USF Controller's Office website. It is typically around October for the fall semester and February for the spring semester. But for the specific date, you do want to go ahead and check their website. Even if a student doesn't have the tuition deferment themselves, their hall rates will still be due on that tuition deadline.
Got it. Okay. The next section is unpaid charges. So any unpaid hall rate, cancellation fee, or other charges accrued under the agreement may be applied to students' university account and may result in a hold being placed on students' record or academic transcripts. So there are additional sections, 3.2 and 3.3 for additional details of this. But basically it means that if you don't pay what's posted on your account, there could be a hold. Is that correct?
Yes, so any balance that is placed on your OASIS hold, whether it's from housing or any other department on campus, would inquire a hold on your account. That in order to release the hold, you would have to pay the amount that is due.
And if there's a hold, this could impact your room selection, correct? Can you select a room if you have a hold on your account?
Yes. So you can still select a room if you have a hold on your account, but you cannot register for classes. So you may be able to select your room, but later on when we go through and see which students are enrolled and which students are not, you may not be able to remain in that room.
Got it. Okay. So it's important to pay your fees.
Yep.
So next, number 5, method of payment. The methods of payment are listed below. You can pay online. Online payments via credit card or e-check for housing may be completed via the USF payment gateway available at MyUSF. Online payments made via the OASIS payment link will be processed as per the USF cashier's office protocols. And then the other option is payments by check. Housing payments by paper check. Money order may be mailed to the USF Payment Center, and then it has the address listed there in this section of the agreement. So you can pay online or by check. Do you have any questions that are usually associated with this section, or do you usually send those over to the USF cashier's office?
Yeah, so if students have any questions about how to pay or methods of payment, we usually do direct them over to the cashier's office because they handle that portion of the student's process.
Okay, so that was the rates and payments section. The next section is the payment schedule. And the first part of this section is payment schedule, which is all housing fees are due by the financial aid deferment date for the term in which the housing is effective. Please refer to the University Scholarships and Financial Aid Services website for information on the deferment date for each term. So when are they usually around, the deferment dates?
Yeah, so we mentioned it a little earlier, but the deferment date for fall is typically around October, and the deferment date for the spring term is typically around February. For the summer, I believe that the deferment date is sometimes in early to mid-July. So the specific date changes every year with each term, but it can be found on either the USF Controller's Office website or the University Scholarships and Financial Aid Services website, like it is listed here.
And if someone has specific questions about their scholarship or financial aid, those are separate departments, correct?
Yes, so if they have questions about their financial aid, they should contact the Office of Financial Aid for any doubts on that.
Okay, so the next part of this section is the default process. If a student defaults in the payment of hall rate or other housing charges, the student may be charged a 5% late fee on the outstanding balance, remain liable for the agreed amount, and any other housing charges. In addition, the student university records may be placed on administrative hold. So this is about late charges.
Yes. So like we mentioned, the hall rate is due on the deferment deadline. If you don't pay by that deadline, you may incur some fees. Any other fees that are applied to your account, like a cancellation fee or improper checkout, those typically have about 30 days to be paid. If after that set time they are not paid, that 5% late fee will be applied. So if a student has any questions about their late fee or anything like that, they can always contact the cashier's office because they can give them more information on the specific deadlines for their specific fees.
All right, and then the next part of payment schedule is collection process. Students failing to make payment within the appropriate time frame as set by the University Controller's Office will be subject to the university's collections policy. And it's saying to see the University Controller's website for more information.
So if you don't pay by the set deadline, you may be sent over to the university collections, which is overseen by the controller's office.
All right, so next we're going to be talking about cancellation. So this is a pretty layered section. We're going to go through all of it, and I know that you get a lot of questions about this section, so we'll go through the most frequently asked questions related to each part of this. So to get started, I'm just going to read the beginning of this. Notwithstanding anything contained herein, and even when students' cancellation is permitted under the terms of the agreement may not be canceled without the prior written approval of the department. The department may, within its sole discretion, deny any cancellation requests. Where cancellation of the agreement is subject to the cancellation fees set forth in the agreement, any fees will be added to the student's financial account and will be due and owing immediately. Non-payment of the fees may result in a student registration hold or restriction on graduation and ability to obtain a transcript. Late payments may also include collection fees. Students should refer to Section 3 of this agreement for more information regarding the payment schedule. So that's the opener for this, and what exactly does that mean, Zio?
Yeah, so when it comes to cancellations, it is something that is done formally. So if a student would like to cancel for whatever reason, they would need to do so by submitting a request on the housing portal. And once that is done, it is up to the discretion of the department whether the cancellation request is approved or denied.
And we'll go over the eligibility for cancellation in detail once we get to that section. The department may, in accordance with applicable rules of the university, initiate reassignment or cancel the agreement if deemed necessary by the department in the best interest of order, health, conduct, safety, security, disaster, failure to comply with any and all university regulations, policies, or directives. So this is canceling by the department for one of these reasons.
Yes, so basically the reasons that our department can cancel you as a student.
Mm-hmm. So A under this is cancellation due to non-enrollment. The department may cancel the agreement for any individual who is not enrolled at the university for the duration of the agreement. Students whose agreement has been canceled will be required to vacate the room within 24 hours from notification unless otherwise indicated. Any and all cancellation fees will not be charged to the student as applicable. See Section 4.3 for the cancellation fee schedule. And a registration hold will be placed on their record for the remainder of the agreement term. A student who desires to re-enroll in classes during the term of the agreement will be required to secure a new housing agreement for an available space before registering for classes. So this is if you are not enrolled or taking classes at the university. You're not enrolled at the university.
Yes. So if you are not enrolled at the university, that basically just means that you're not registered for any courses. So if this happens after you've moved in, we will go through and just double check that all students that are on campus are taking courses. If for whatever reason you are not taking courses, we will send you an email just asking if you are planning to or in the process of getting enrolled. If you send us some type of documentation from your advisor or anything like that, letting us know that you are in the process of attaining those classes, we will give you a little bit of an extension so we won't kick you out right at the 24-hour mark. So as long as you let us know what your steps are, we will go ahead and give you a little bit of an extension until you can get enrolled. We will reach out to students multiple times about the non-enrollment status. And at one point, after a few tries, if we don't hear back from the student about their plans, we will require the student to vacate their space.
So what are the, if someone is canceled for non-enrollment, what does the term entail for getting their money back for their agreement? Is that something that's later on in the agreement?
It is, but I can cover it now just to kind of cover it a few times just so it's repeated. So if you cancel due to non-enrollment, you are still required to pay a cancellation fee. If you moved into your room, you will also be required to pay for the nights that you are in the room. So if you spend 2 nights in the room, you'll be required to pay for those 2 nights. And the rest of the fees will be credited back to your Oasis account. And then the cancellation fee will be applied.
Got it. Okay. So the next a next reason for the department to cancel on the student is cancellation due to academic dismissal. Students who are academically dismissed by the university will not be charged a cancellation fee, provided they cancel the agreement, vacate the room, and complete the prescribed checkout procedures at least 5 business days prior to the opening of the residence halls for the upcoming term. Students who are academically dismissed and fail to complete these steps by the deadline noted above will be charged a $1,500 cancellation fee and a daily prorated rate. So this is if they are going through academic dismissal. It says here that they could potentially not be charged that cancellation fee, but they need to be out 5 days before.
Yes. So if you are academically dismissed after the fall term, just make sure that you are vacating your room and checking out completely and submitting your cancellation request at least 5 days before the beginning of the spring term. So if you do all of those things by the end of whichever term you were academically dismissed for, you would not be charged a cancellation fee. But if you do it after the upcoming term begins, then that $1,500 cancellation fee will be applied, as well as the prorated rate.
Got it. Okay. And so the next is cancellation due to conduct dismissal. Students are removed from the residence halls and or dismissed from the university as a result of student conduct sanction or are currently a subject of an ongoing investigation by Student Conduct and Ethical Development will be subject to all full fees set forth in the agreement, and their account will be charged full hall rate through the term of the agreement. So what does this mean?
So this means that if you are under investigation or have any type of situation with the Office of Student Conduct and Ethical Development, you will not be refunded. If you are required to leave campus, you will be responsible for the entirety of the rate. Again, this is on a case-by-case basis, so the Office of Student Conduct and Ethical Development will reach out to the student as well as our department to let us know what the next steps will be for the student.
Got it. Okay. And then the next reason, and the last reason for the department canceling on the student or initiating a cancellation is cancellation due to administrative dismissal. Students who are removed from the residence halls and or dismissed from the university for administrative reasons will be responsible for a daily prorated hall rate.
Yep. So if students are dismissed from the university administratively for whatever reason, they will be responsible for all of the nights that they spent in the room. That is what that daily prorated rate means. It just means that you will be responsible for the nights you were there.
Okay, so the next section under cancellation is the cancellation request by the student. So there are eligibility requirements that come into place when requesting a cancellation. So we're going to start with just stating what that eligibility is, and then later on we're going to dive into each of them and talk a little bit about it. So just to start with eligibility, this is at 2A, eligibility. The student may request a cancellation of the agreement if one of the following conditions is met. Documentation will be required and fees may be assessed as more particularly set forth below. So the first reason is the student has not been assigned a space. The second, the student has been assigned a space, but a cancellation request is submitted in the housing portal within 48 hours of the timestamp of the assignment. 3, this is the non-enrolled student. This could be the student graduates and does not continue in another USF program. B, the student receives military order for active duty. C, the student has a USF medical withdrawal. Or D, the student withdraws and is no longer enrolled at USF. And then 4, we have the enrolled student. The student participates in an academic program that requires residence outside of Hillsborough, Pasco, or Pinellas County. B, the student participates in a USF-sponsored and or approved study abroad program headquartered or stationed outside of Hillsborough, Pasco, or Pinellas County. C, the student relocates to USF St. Petersburg campus, submits a USF St. Petersburg housing agreement, and is assigned a space for a residence hall located in St. Petersburg. Or the student is newly married during the term of the agreement. And a note here, a student living in the village agrees that early cancellation of this agreement may not be permissible. Like we talked about in the beginning, the village is owned by a separate company, so we just need to keep that in mind with some different fees and regulations that are set in place there. So we listed out the reasons that for eligibility of cancellation. Like I said, we are going to go into each of those reasons and talk a little bit about them. The next, though, is the procedure that's associated with that cancellation. So students who meet one of the eligibility requirements as set forth above in the section 2A that I just read may request the cancellation of the agreement. The student must submit a written request via the 23-24 Student Housing Cancellation Request Form, which is available in the Housing Portal under Requests, indicating which of the conditions set forth in 2A applies and provides the required documentation. Requests for cancellation over the phone, in person, or via email will not be accepted. So this is super important because it's something that, in the beginning of each term, your team is spending a lot of time going through these different emails and phone calls. But what is the best way to go about for submitting a cancellation request?
The best way to go about canceling or submitting a cancellation request would be to submit the request on the portal. Of course, you can email us or call us, but even if you do those things prior to, we will still and always need that official formal cancellation request through the housing portal.
And we'll go over what is going to be required for each different type of request because there are separate documentation requirements for that. Yes. So let's talk about the cancellation request without an assignment. Any cancellation request received before an assignment is made will be approved with no fee. Please note that the application fee will not be refunded. So what does this mean?
Yes, so this means that if you did your housing application and you paid your $50 fee, and then you decide, I don't think I want to live on campus, or I don't think I want to come to USF, you can submit that cancellation request at any time, and you won't be required to pay any additional fee if you do not have a room. If you do not select a room, you can cancel at any time, and the only thing that you will remain responsible for is that application fee. Once you select a room, that is when you would need to meet one of the other requirements that's listed later on.
Got it. Okay. So that's important when we're talking about standby list because, like we said, when you're agreeing to be on the standby list, you're going to be placed into the next available room. And once you're placed in that room, you are held to the agreement, and you wouldn't be able to cancel because of no assignment at that point.
Yes. So if you're on the standby list and you decide, hey, I no longer want to be on the standby list, it's important that you do that cancellation request as soon as you can, just so that we're aware and we don't accidentally assign you.
Right. And of course, always check that USF email. I think that's
a
major theme.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about cancellation requests due to graduation. A student may request cancellation of their agreement and will not be charged a cancellation fee provided that the following conditions are met. 1, the student is no longer registered for any academic program, degree seeking or not, at the university, and the student submits the request before the priority registration deadline posted on the Office of the Registrar website. And 3, the student completes the room checkout process at the end of the term or semester in which the graduation occurs. Failure to properly follow the steps above will result in a $1,500 fee. So if a student is graduating and no longer taking any classes at the university, they are eligible to submit a cancellation request.
Yes, this comes up a lot in the fall term when students are graduating in the fall. Mm-hmm. They always ask if we have a fall only agreement or anything like that, and we don't. So if a student is living on campus and they intend to graduate in December, as soon as they register for as soon as they register for graduation, they can go ahead and submit their cancellation request, and they will be able to cancel with no fee as long as it's before that priority deadline set by the registrar.
Great. And let's talk about cancellation request due to non-enrollment. A student who receives an assignment prior to the opening of the residence halls and cancels for non-enrollment shall be considered a cancellation for non-enrollment. A student who receives an assignment and has their courses dropped for any reason after the opening of the residence halls shall have their agreement canceled but charged a daily prorated hall rate plus 1/2 of the remaining rate on the agreement. A registration hold will be placed on their record for the remainder of the agreement term. So can you break down this section for me?
Yes. So if a student is applying for housing and then selects a room and does not enroll in classes, you will be canceled under the non-enrollment policy that we kind of went over a little earlier. So that means that you will be charged the appropriate cancellation fee. If you decide to non-enroll or withdraw from all of your classes after you've moved in, you will be responsible for all of the nights that you spent in your room, as well as that cancellation fee, which is just half the remaining rent on your agreement. It's important to note that when we're talking about half the remaining rent, it is half the remaining rent for the term of your agreement and not just the semester.
Right.
So if you cancel in the fall term, you will be responsible for the remainder of fall plus the remainder of spring divided by 2.
Okay, got it. So the next part is cancellation request due to deferred admission enrollment status. So a student who has received an assignment and cancels their application due to an approved deferred enrollment request may be charged a cancellation fee in accordance with Section 4.3. If the student enrolls in the approved term, submits an application to live on campus, and assumes occupancy of the room, then the spring portion of the cancellation fee will be adjusted on the student's OASIS account and the hold lifted. The original application fee will not be applied towards the new application. So what does this mean?
Yep. So this means that if you apply for housing for the fall spring term and then you later say, actually, I want to start at USF in the spring. If we will go ahead and cancel you based off of your non-enrollment status, sort of, and you will receive the applicable cancellation fee if you decide to just start over in the spring. If you apply for housing in the spring, and apply for housing, pay your fee, and select a room for the spring, then we will remove the cancellation fee, and then your hold will also be removed, so you can apply for classes when you start in the spring.
All right. And cancellation request due to military orders. A student who receives lawful orders to report for military service during the terms of the agreement shall be permitted to cancel their agreement without a cancellation fee, provided that the following conditions are met. The orders were received after the student was assigned to the residence halls, and the order require the student to report for a duty prior to the end of the semester in which the orders were received. The students will be charged a prorated hall rate for the time of occupancy.
Yep. So when students are requesting to cancel due to military orders, we request a official copy of their military orders. So we will read through that, make sure that you receive this prior to you selecting, or not prior, but after you selected your room. And then after that, the student will be able to cancel for that. For that reason, there is no additional cancellation fee if you cancel for this reason. The only thing you would be required to pay is the prorated rate for the nights that you spent in the room.
Got it. Okay. So this would be, you would have to show that documentation when submitting the request.
Yes. So when you submit your request, we'll ask for documentation and you just send over your order so we can look through them.
All right. So let's talk about cancellation request due to a medical withdrawal. That's the next section. The student must provide a medical withdrawal that has been accepted and approved by the university to be considered for a cancellation due to a medical withdrawal. Medical withdrawal terminates the agreement for any semester commencing after the medical withdrawal date, and the student will receive a credit for a portion of the hall rate for the semester the student withdraws for medical reasons, based upon the student's move-out date. So I know that you get questions about this a lot. Can you kind of break what that means down for me?
Yes. So it's important to know kind of what a medical withdrawal means.
Right.
So with a medical withdrawal, you are withdrawing from the university as a whole. You are not just withdrawing from housing. You have to have proof from the academic regulations committee. They usually, students who are medically withdrawing do a petition, and you do need to provide proof of the approval of that petition from that department. You can access the petitions through the Student Outreach and Support Department, and once you submit this documentation, you will be processed for a medical withdrawal. You will be credited for a portion of the hall rate that you were in the space, and you will not be charged any additional cancellation fee if you are canceled under this reason.
Okay. The next, we're going to talk about cancellation requests due to, but before we actually move on to that, what are you going to need from the student in order to process the medical withdrawal paper? Is it paperwork that's submitted through the housing portal?
So nothing is submitted through the housing portal. Typically you do your request, and then all of the documentation that we require is to be emailed to us. We'll send you an email requesting documentation. You just reply right to that email.
Okay.
with your documentation. For the medical withdrawal specifically, we just need the approval of your ARC petition or the Academic Regulations Committee petition. We need kind of just the documentation saying, yes, you have been medically withdrawn from that department.
Okay. And the cancellation request due to the campus change. So we do have housing in USF St. Petersburg. So if you are canceling to go to USF St. Pete, student may submit a request for cancellation along with proof of an active agreement for the equivalent term for the campus to which they are transferring, destination campus. Any student submitting a cancellation request after the university's add drop period of 5:01 p.m. Eastern of the first Friday of the semester will be considered for a cancellation at the start of the spring semester. If the student is transitioning to a USF residence hall in St. Petersburg in the spring and moves out of their current assignment at the end of the fall term, then the student shall be released from the agreement at the conclusion of the term without penalty when both of the following conditions are met. 1, a current housing application and requirements have been submitted to Destination Housing Department within 3 business days of the approved cancellation request. And 2, the student assumes occupancy of the assigned space at the destination location. Okay, so break this down for us, Sia.
Yeah, so if you are on the Tampa campus and you want to switch to St. Pete, all you have to do is submit a cancellation request for the Tampa campus and then submit your application for the St. Pete campus. If you have a room selected at the time that you do the cancellation, then your room assignment and your cancellation request will remain pending until you are assigned on the St. Petersburg campus. The St. Pete campus and the USF Tampa campus, we both use the same system on our housing, so we are able to see whether or not you have an assignment at St. Pete, whether you have an application at St. Pete, and vice versa. So once you are assigned on the St. Pete campus, we will go ahead and officially approve your cancellation. If you wish to switch from St. Pete to Tampa, then you have to go through the cancellation process with the St. Pete team, which may vary a little bit from our cancellation process. So it's important to contact them directly for those for that process. And then you also have to apply for a housing application here at the USF Tampa campus, and you will go through room selection as normal. So once you've canceled at St. Pete and you have your application at Tampa, you will be able to select a room on campus and live on the Tampa campus instead.
Okay. And then the next eligibility is the cancellation request due to marriage. So the university does not provide student housing for families. A student may submit a cancellation request due to marriage when a legal union occurs during the period of the agreement. The student shall be charged the appropriate cancellation fee as outlined in the agreement, Section 4.3. Upon submitting the cancellation request, the student must submit a copy of the marriage license as a supporting document to process the cancellation request.
Yep, so all we will need from students in this situation is the marriage license. It is important to note that the student must have gotten married after they selected their room. So if they've been married for a few years or anything like that, that would not be an eligible reason to cancel. It must be a marriage that occurred after they selected their room or after they submitted their application.
Got it. Okay. And then the next section is the cancellation request due to consideration of extenuating unforeseen circumstances. So a student may submit a cancellation request for consideration of extenuating unforeseen circumstances that arise after the effective date of the agreement. The student must submit all supporting documentation they wish to have considered when cancellation request is reviewed. If the cancellation of the agreement is approved, the student will be subject to posted fees. If the cancellation of the agreement is approved after the student has checked into the space, student will be responsible for a prorated hall rate for time assigned to the room, plus 1/2 of the remaining hall rate charges on the agreement. This may include fall and/or spring charges. If the cancellation request is denied, the student remains responsible for the terms of the agreement. Online class modality is not considered an extenuating circumstance.
Yep. So a question that we get a lot when it comes to extenuating unforeseen circumstance is basically, what is an extenuating or unforeseen circumstance? What falls under that criteria? So this can be described as any type of financial, personal, medical change to your circumstance that has occurred since you picked your room. So once you pick your room, anything that happens after that, that has a significant change to your circumstance is considered an unforeseen circumstance. So when it comes to this, it is really on a case-by-case basis of what is required. So it is very difficult to say what kind of documentation a student can submit if I don't know exactly what's going on with the student. So we do know that the documentation that the student must submit has to be official records, right? So it has to be some type of official legal, medical, employment documentation that supports the need of the student. For example, if a student applies for housing and selects a room, and then later on their main caregiver, mom or dad, whoever it may be, loses their job, then we will need a letter from the employer stating as of this date, they are no longer employed with us, or they can just send us, their termination letter with that information. But again, this really has a lot of case by case scenarios that we would have to kind of talk through with the student. So if a student does believe that they have an extenuating or unforeseen circumstance that has occurred to them, we do encourage them to reach out to us either before or after they submit their request, so that we can go ahead and talk through their options with them on a more personal level.
Perfect. Okay, great. And then the last part of the cancellation section is the cancellation fee. So unless a different cancellation fee is specifically stated above, a student whose cancellation request is approved after a space has been assigned will be charged a cancellation fee of, and it has it listed here, the different pricing of the cancellation fee based on the date that you did cancel. So we went through some different sections of eligibility, and it did say that you'd have to pay the cancellation fee in some of them, and it's broken down here what those are. And I can read them here. It's $750. Actually, I think that there's one listed here.
Yes.
$500 if the cancellation request was submitted in the housing portal before May 1st, 2023. $750 if cancellation request was submitted in the housing portal between May 1st and 31st. $1,000 if cancellation was submitted in the housing portal between June 1st and June 30th. $1,250 if cancellation was submitted between July 1st and July 31st. $1,500 if it was submitted between August 1st and 16th, and then half the remaining haul rate for the agreement if the cancellation request was submitted in the housing portal August 17th, 2023 or after. So what are some questions you get when it comes to those cancellation fees?
Yeah, so when it comes to the cancellation fees are only applicable to students who have a room selected. So even if you cancel on June 1st and you don't have a room selected, you are not going to be charged a cancellation fee.
Okay.
Again, you'll just have to pay that $50 application fee. So that is something that is asked a lot. If you don't have a room selected, you are not considered for a fee. Another question that we get a lot is, can I just pay the fee and cancel? So the answer is no. The reason why is students have to meet a cancellation criteria in order to be assessed a cancellation fee. If you do not meet the cancellation criteria, then you will not be able to cancel, and you will not be assessed a cancellation fee because you will still be responsible for your room.
That's very important. So this only applies to those that have that eligibility that
Yeah,
we just
so
went through.
if you are deemed eligible by our office, whether it's you're not registered for classes, you have military orders, if you have those things, then you will be charged a cancellation fee. Actually, I misspoke. Military orders don't get a cancellation fee, but if you have any other criteria that's listed here, then you would be charged a cancel fee.
Got it. Okay. All right, Zio. So the next section that we're going to dive into is appeals. And here it states, students may submit to the department an appeal regarding the application of the agreement if there is additional relevant information to be considered not available at the time of the original request for cancellation, or if additional documentation supporting change in circumstances is provided. Appeals must be submitted in writing using the appeal form located in the housing portal under requests. Appeals are reviewed by the appeals officer and committee. Appeals are not to be given or heard verbally. Decisions by the appeals officer and committee are final and cannot be further appealed. So what does this section mean when it comes to appeals?
Yes, so with appeals, this is something that students can do if they have received a decision about something that they feel is incorrect, or that they have other documentation to refute it. So if you get a cancellation fee and you feel like you got the wrong cancellation fee, or if you get an improper checkout fee and you know you checked out properly, these are things that you can appeal. So in the housing portal under requests, you can access the appeals tab and it'll ask you a series of questions. Our appeals committee will follow up with the student and see if we need additional documentation or if there's anything that is needed outside of just the request itself. It is important to note that all appeal decisions are considered final. And if the student wants to refute the appeals decision, they are not able to, but they can always contact our leadership at housing in order to speak further on their requests. They may also appeal their decision again if they have any additional documentation.
I think that goes back to something important that, we like to remind folks that are going through either a cancellation or an appeal process. And that is the more documentation that you can provide up front, really, that cuts down on the back and forth that is going to be needed between the assignments team and those who are submitting the requests. So just make sure that you're reading through the agreement and understanding all of the different documentation and timelines that are associated with it.
Yep.
And then as far as appeals, do you have any other thoughts or frequently asked questions that come to mind with this section?
I do not believe so. I think that is just about it. Appeals are a very case by case basis. Right. So if a student does have a question about their specific appeal, they can always reach out to us or the appeals committee with any specific doubts or concerns.
Okay. The last section lists the general provisions of the agreement. And these are things that are just a little bit more of a definition of certain parts of the agreement in different terms. We're not going to go through each of them today. They are relatively straightforward, listed in the agreement here, but I would like to just remind folks that are going to be signing this agreement and entering the agreement for the fall, spring, or the summer, or whatever term you're looking at, that it's imperative that you do go through the agreement and read through it, make sure you understand all of it, so you know what you're signing when you're coming to live on campus. And the assignments team is here to answer any questions that you may have. They're open Monday through Friday, and they can be reached by phone at 813-974-0001. And that is from 8 to 5 is phone hours, correct?
9 to 4.
9 to 4 phone hours, walk-ins also 9 to 4. And you can email anytime, and then they'll be answering emails throughout the day as well. So we're here to support you on a case-by-case basis and answer any questions that you may have about living on campus or specifics of the agreement. So Zio, thank you so much for taking the time to dive into this. And like I said, there's still a portion of this agreement that we didn't cover at the end. So make sure you go through and read it in entirety. But we hope that you choose to live on campus here. And if you have any questions, you can reach us. Until next time, go Bulls!
Go Bulls!